Well, good afternoon from my backyard. If you happen to come across this video on accident, maybe you're drawn to it because you are a person who's addicted to pornography and you saw the triple X and you just wanted to check it out, or maybe someone referred you to this particular video, or however you came across it, I want to encourage you to stick around for a few minutes. This is a topic that has been around for a long time throughout the history of mankind. Images of people having sexual acts has taken place because it's a sin issue, and it evolves over time. And so the Bible says in Proverbs 7, it says, "I saw among the simple a young man devoid of understanding passing along the street near her corner. And he took the path to her house in the twilight and evening, in the black and dark night, and there a woman met him with the attire of a harlot and a crafty heart. She was loud and rebellious. Her feet would not stay at home. At times she was outside, at times in the open square, lurking at every corner." Now I kind of, took little snippets of that particular scripture, but I would encourage you to read chapter 7, all of it. But the word simple is talking about someone who is void of discernment, who lacks in the area of moral discernment especially, and so they're gullible, they're seducible. And so this happens early on in the age of young men, young boys who are gullible. They are drawn into the open square where this, as it says, is lurking at every corner. Not just the prostitute in the case of our text, but we're talking about pornography. So this is big business. And I've tried to come up with some kind of figure. Best I could come up with it was an estimation. So the smut business is big business. It's averaging, I guess, the real estimates are about $2 to $4 billion. And so New York Times came out with an article some time ago, and they called the article Naked Capitalists. And they were saying that this business is between 10 billion and 14 billion annually. And so I don't know where they are getting their resources, but nonetheless, it's $1 billion business, to say the least. And so no matter how you look at it, the love of money, which is the root of all evil, is the source of this particular business. And so there are lots of victims, young men and women. When you factor in that this contributes to the human trafficking, which is a global problem, not just a problem in the United States, but it's a global problem. They are saying, statistics are saying that there are 25 million victims of human trafficking around the world. 25 million people are being victimized. That means there's several of those 25 million are girls and young women being exploited for sex slaves, sex traffic, whatever you want to call it. And that boils down to some real issues about this is somebody's daughter we're talking about. How did they get to this position? Who's handling this stuff? Who's behind this? And so, when you view pornography, you are actually in support of this because there's a demand that is being met. And so that's why there is 25 million people being trafficked. I understand not all of them are for the sexual industry, but nonetheless, there are several million who are, and some of them, their lives are ruined forever. We don't hear the sad stories of these, these paintbrush stars that, some are drawn to in these acts of indecency. And so this is just a secular reality. That's not looking at it from the perspective of what's going on spiritually. And so, when we think about these things, we are living in the last days, okay? Whether you know that or not, whether you care or not, it's not the issue. It's a matter of fact. And so how do we know that? Jesus referred to the fig tree generation, speaking of Israel, and he says that generation shall not pass until the coming of the Son of Man. And so that started in 1948. Okay, there was a Balfour Declaration, which is in the early 1900s, and Israel declared an independent state in May of 1948, which was a miracle. No other nation had ever experienced that, but that's a side issue because Israel becomes a nation, which was a noteworthy thing that happened in 1948. But there were several other things that took place. spiritually that begin to, alter these last days. And so, one of the things that we kind of see the reality of was George Orwell's book. It didn't say anything. It was a fiction book about 1984 and, the Orwellian, rule of government. And so we've seen that in recent years, this crazy stuff happening because of COVID and all the restrictions globally, the WHO and, the CDC and all their stuff they're saying. It's kind of crazy. But anyways, what also happened in 1948 was television was a very, very rare thing. But in 1948, they became more people were buying them. They went from hardly anybody had one because they couldn't afford them to almost everybody, getting them. There's over 1 million in 1948, and it's, now it's commonplace. People have 2, 3 televisions, big screens, whatever you want to call it, they have them. Another thing that factored into the porn industry, was the first Polaroid camera was sold in 1948. And one other thing that I think is very noteworthy is what they call the Kinsey Report. Now, the Kinsey Report was written by a man named Alfred Kinsey. And he did a study on sexual behavior in the human male. It was the first large-scale study of individuals' sexual habits with stunning revelations about infidelity. The sad truth is, so this man did his study amongst prison inmates, those who were rapists, homosexuals, pedophiles. And so, he based his study on those people, and so a man who was drawn to this, and basically you can say kind of enlarged the scope of this mindset, was a man by the name of Hugh Hefner. Hugh Hefner, you can say, was his disciple, kind of off to the side. He takes and develops a magazine called Playboy, and that is basically what we call soft porn. It started there with just pictures, and it began to escalate, into all kinds of things, because pornography never is just one thing. It's a scope. I read a book several years ago, probably 20 years ago, but it's still relevant to this day. The book was called Soft Porn Plays Hardball by Dr. Judith Reisman. Now, she did her study on this whole issue, and one of the chapters that I would often recommend to other guys who would be visiting or other preachers was chapter 5. Chapter 5, I'll never forget it. I still know the title of chapter 5. It says soft porn, or what was it? No, Playboy. It was soft porn emasculates the American male, which was a heck of a title. But when she broke down that particular chapter, she stated the reason based on studies of how it's caused a decline in masculinity, in maleness, and if you look at the results of things that have taken place, and I factor in that Tucker Carlson just did a series, I think it was last year, on the levels of testosterone declining in males over the last several decades. Each decade it goes down. And so I wonder if that has anything to do with the fact that pornography has entered into our society. It's mainstream. People can get it anywhere. They look at it. And so that's maybe the reason behind all the ED medications and all the testosterone pills and elixirs that are supposed to fix the problem. Well, the problem isn't a physical problem. The problem is a spiritual problem. And it's emasculating the American male, and matter of fact, all males. And what happens is that this use of pornography becomes a bondage, which is what I really want to consider, because I myself have been in deep, dark places years before my salvation, and I don't want to get into details on this particular video, but you know what? Reach out to me. I'll put my website below in a link. Hopefully I can figure that out. And reach out to me if you need some help, someone to pray for you, a pastor that I can refer to. I'd be glad to do that, because I know there are people out there who struggle with this. They have a bondage. Some of them, especially Christian men that want to be free from this, will go to an altar and pray and say sorry, repent, and then weeks later they find themselves slipping, find themselves going back into the whole same thing. Why? Because it's an addiction. Where it evolves from is a dopamine addiction. That's a chemical in the brain that thrives on, drugs do this. It gives that stimulus in the brain which craves more. And so the same thing with pornography. And the thing with pornography is once that dopamine is triggered, it doesn't just want another satisfying result. It wants variety. And so that's why people get deeper into the addictive bondage of pornography. There was an interview done I think it was in the 80s, with Dr. James Dobson of Focus on the Family with a man by the name of Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy was on death row he was a serial killer, and he would basically, take disgusting things that he did, with women, and all kinds of madness. But in that interview, he made the comment. He goes, "I was the guy next door." He goes, "I was the guy next door. You would never thought that I had a problem, that I had a lust problem, a wicked desire." He goes, "It all started with simply looking at a magazine. And the dopamine kicked in, and he became bound, and he wanted variety, and he happened to take it to an extreme." Am I saying people who are hooked on pornography are going to be serial killers? No. But I'm telling you, that bondage will drive you to do things that you don't want to do, take you to places you say you'd never go, do things you said you'd never do. You'll find yourself visiting strip clubs, whorehouses, prostitutes. Even in America, prostitution is still a big business, even though in some places it's illegal. People turn a blind eye to it. But that's because there's this root issue of pornography that is stirring the dopamine, addiction. And the other factor is that people are addicted to shame. They're bound to the shame. And so they want to be free, but because they're ashamed of themselves, they can't be free. It's almost as like a cycle. The dopamine says, "I want some more of this," and then you go through the act, whatever it might be, sexually gratifying yourself, and then you find yourself ashamed, and so it's a cycle. I'm ashamed, I don't want it, and so it keeps you bound. That it's a temporary fix to another issue, which might be rooted in rejection. There are several people growing up with no fathers, broken homes, divorce, separation, orphans, abandonment, all kinds of things. And so this rejection is in the heart and the soul of people, and some people find a temporary fix through pornography, and they find themselves satisfying, feeling relieved. But like I said, it's just a piece of the pie when it comes to this bondage, because you go to the cycle of the dopamine, wanting more, and then the shame of it, and then you find yourself, well, I'm satisfied, and then I'm not satisfied. Then there's the bondage of secrecy. It's because a lot of people aren't talking about it. Not a lot of men will go and say, "Hey, I'm struggling with this issue." It's almost the pride rises up and say, "Oh, okay, I can quit anytime. I can get a handle on this. I can change this. I can fix this." And so it becomes a very big stronghold in people's life. It's a secret sin. They'll go to an altar, they maybe hear a message on it, and they get convicted on it, and they go and pray, and they turn around and back into the cycle of sin again. There's no real answers to their life, and so there's always spinning out of control. And then you factor in those that think that if they get married, that'll change things. If I'll get married and I'll be able to find my satisfaction in my wife. I'm telling you, it's going to kill intimacy. It's because pornography, you don't have to work for satisfaction. You don't have to work on intimacy. You don't have to work on your relationship. You don't have to do anything because it's all so easily gratified. And then you find yourself, because it's so easy, you find yourself distance. Not only that, you can become agitated with your spouse. You can become closed to your spouse. You can become, totally alienated to her emotional needs, her spiritual needs, all because it's all about you and your self-gratification, and the problem in your own heart and in your marriage is starting to go out of control, simply because self is on the throne. Self is at rule. And so that in lies the big issue, is when you are caught up in this cycle. Self is trying to hide it. Self is trying to satisfy itself. Self is trying to seek it out. Self is ignoring the real issues, the real bondages, the real snare that it's caused, and the real problems of the home life, the marriage, other things like this. And so there are things that men think that they can fix, but there is no fixing this, in a simple way. To be honest, what you need to do is be honest with your sin, honest with God, and you really need to look for a pastor. If you go to a church and you have a pastor, you need to talk to him. You need to be open about this issue, about this bondage. Don't sugarcoat it. It starts somewhere. I unfortunately saw my first, I can't even remember, 10 years old maybe. Like I said, it took me to deep, dark places. Made me do things I'm ashamed of. And I'm not here to say that, but Jesus Christ set me free. And there was a time when, temptation would come roaring back. But you know what? You can get the victory. You can be delivered. But you're going to have to be honest. You're going to have to be honest with yourself. You're going to have to be honest with your spouse, and you need to go to your pastor and talk. You don't want to lay this all out on your spouse at once. You need to find some wisdom. You need to find someone that's going to hold you accountable. Someone's going to talk to you about this issue and bring some real insight. And you're going to have to lay a hold of God. You're going to have to say, God, I need to be changed. I need deliverance. And maybe there's some issues of shame, issues of rejection, issues of violations, perhaps. In your past that has wrapped itself around this problem in your heart and in your mind, and the only way of escape for you right now is the porn addiction. But it's taking you out, and if you don't get it right, it's going to take you to hell. And so that's a sad truth, because it is a sexual sin. It's adultery inside your heart, inside your mind. Okay, you're looking at something that is violating your inward soul, and so you need to get that right. And so, like I said, I just want to say a few things about this topic. I've collected materials. I've read books over the years. For decades, I've been a Christian for almost 35 years, and so I've counseled people, talked to people, and I've seen people, and I can tell those who are struggling. You can tell those who are battling this, and they will stay in that place unless they come to an end of themselves. Take self off the throne and say, God, I need you to rule and reign in my heart. I need my pastor to help me. I need a man who's not going to judge me, but he's going to work with me and help me to get out of this issue. And if you stumble, there's grace. If you make a mistake, there's grace. But hiding it, concealing it, and bearing it is not going to work. And so for those of you who this might stir some thoughts, I hope you contact your pastor. Like I said, I'll put my information below and the link below, and you could reach out to me if you come across it and you don't go to one of our churches. I'd be glad to point you in the right direction. Okay, someone near you who would love to help you. Until that's all I got to say. Until next time, keep on keeping on.